Let's record button. Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Jean Fourie, and this morning we're talking about writing and handwriting. So we're having a look at the difficulties that learners have with handwriting and with writing, and some of the strategies that we can use to support learners. So we know that handwriting and writing are similar things, but very different psychological processes that are required for them. So when you are looking at a learner and writing down any of the difficulties that you are seeing with learners who might have some kind of learning disability, a specific learning disability, please make a very clear distinction between handwriting, which has got to do with the motor output, the fine motor output of what is written down on the page with a pen or a pencil, that is handwriting, and writing, which is a much bigger, broader concept that covers a whole lot of different areas of functioning. And we're going to have a look at some of those things today as we go along. So handwriting is only one small aspect of this whole idea of writing. And writing is a very complex psychological process that takes place, and it involves producing written language on paper, typed or written by hand, but it's that production process. It involves semantics, which is the meanings of words and the content that you want to generate. It involves syntax, syntactical things, and syntax has got to do with the order of words, the grammar, how the language structures words on the page. It's got to do with lexical knowledge. This is the knowledge of the words. We know that there's always a better word that you can use for any writing that we do, and the audience that you're writing for determines the kinds of words that you will be using. So in order to do handwriting and writing, we also need to understand the phonological processes, and we've done a lecture on phonological awareness, our ability of the sounds of the language and how the sounds map onto the representations, the letters, the symbols on the page. And we need all of this knowledge to come together in order to do appropriate writing. So it's the execution and production of the motor processes. So when we're asking children to just write something, the handwriting is one aspect. It's the motor control, the motor process of a very much more complex process that is happening in the background, where you are thinking of ideas, putting them together, and writing a paragraph. So we distinguish between handwriting and writing. So I want to give you an example of a learner's handwriting where the child has difficulty with actual handwriting. And this learner is in the 5th grade, and this learner was writing sentences. The first sentence is, I going to the beach. Here, if you look at, there's an I, there's a G, O, ing. 2 is reversed, the letters are reversed, the, and beach, B, capital E, small e, and the learner ran out of ideas, I think, at this stage. So doesn't know the ch sound, how to make a ch sound. The, again, beach is fun. And here is a vowel confusion. So the A and the A. These vowels are often confused by learners who have learning difficulties. And so you can see that there are problems with putting the letters in the correct order in a sentence, and going should be one of those sight words that the learner should have automatically in their heads and be able to produce, to read that word and to write it down without doing any thinking. The word beach is a complex word, and here we can see that you need to understand that certain graphemes, like certain sounds, like the ch sound, are made with two graphemes, two letters, a k and a h, joined together to make a ch sound. And so the learner has not learned some of those basic phonological sounds and their letter correspondence that should already be well established, certainly by the 5th grade of school. So this learner definitely has learning problems, and we can see that they have a problem with constancy, with remembering what that particular sound and its letter correspondence is made of with regards to the words in this passage that they have written here. Okay, so we know from research that there are significant correlations between handwriting fluency and reading speed. So handwriting fluency is how quickly you write, and how quickly reading speed is how quickly you read. So when people have done research with learners who do not have learning problems and learners who do have learning problems, they have been able to see that those with learning problems will have difficulties with their reading speed, so they're reading slowly, processing information slowly, and the output, the handwriting, is also slow and not fluent. So we also know that students who have difficulty with handwriting will experience overall academic problems. So they're going to have problems with all aspects of reading, doing schoolwork, studying for tests, doing any of the content that's required in their curriculum. And people often will think that where children are reversing letters, so where they are, instead of writing a b, they write a d, or instead of writing a g, they write a p. So when people will often say that reversal of letters is a key thing to look for when learners are having handwriting problems, but this is not always the case. There's studies that have been done that show that yes, letter reversals are an indicator that there might be an underlying problem, but they are not always a good predictor on their own that the learner will have a problem with schooling. So one needs to take into consideration a variety of different factors, not just reversals of letters. And so this brings us to the idea of dysgraphia, and learners who have handwriting problems fall on a continuum of difficulties. So the difficulties can be mild, and mild difficulties are having slight difficulties with writing and with handwriting, to the very complex and much more problematic when we talk about dysgraphia. The learner falls on the severe end of the spectrum of writing problems. So we don't say that a learner has a specific learning disorder or that they have dysgraphia until a formal diagnostic assessment has been done by someone who can do this diagnostic assessment, and the student needs to show difficulties in a variety of different spheres. There's a continual, persistent, across the board, in all of their writing, there is difficulties that they are experiencing. And only then can we say that the child has dysgraphia. So a lot of people have poor handwriting. A lot of people have handwriting that is generally illegible, but in order to make this severity of diagnosis, the difficulty must be highly and very severe and pronounced, and affects all aspects of the child's schooling. So here is another example of handwriting difficulties, and this is the learner who is in the 5th grade. The diagnostic tasks that one gives to learners, and these would be tasks that are set by a remedial therapist or a psychologist, someone who is in the field of assessing and figuring out what the difficulties are that learners are having and doing diagnosis. There are a variety of diagnostic tasks that are given, and the first task is to write the alphabet out. So you can see here on the top line, the learner has been asked to write the alphabet, and a clinician who is looking at how the learner is doing this will be looking for how quickly they do it, how fluently they do it, where are their mistakes that they made. In the 5th grade, one should be able to write the letters of the alphabet without making any mistakes. So it should be a fluent, easy process that gets done. And then another diagnostic thing is that they will be given a sentence to write and asked to maybe copy something. There's a task where you ask learners to copy a sentence. So the copy task, you want to see how quickly they can copy down something and accurately. Can they do that? And you can also give a task where you ask them to write a sentence making up something that they are thinking about. So there are a variety of different ways that we look at these difficulties with writing. And some of the tasks would be timed. So you could say in 1 minute, how many letters or words can the learner write, so that you can work out how quickly they are writing. And this has got to do with speed of writing. And we know that if learners are writing at a speed that is lower than the average speed of all the kids in their class, that they will be battling and not keeping up and not staying with the curriculum and the work that's required. So we look at diagnostically, we look at where the learner's having difficulty, and we look at fluency, and we look at speed. How quickly are they able to write whatever and at their age-appropriate grade. So here is another example. This learner is in the 7th grade, and again you can see the first task was to write the alphabet, and although the learner started out all right, they do get a little bit more untidy, and the letters become more illegible as they go on. And as you can see, once you start asking them to write sentences and copy things, and here is a production sentence where they've had to produce the sentence themselves, it becomes more illegible. This learner does not space the words out separately on the page, so they've got a spatial orientation difficulty. And if you had to analyze this writing, I'm sure that you would also find that there would be spelling problems as well. So when you are teaching, have a look at learners' handwriting, look to see what the formation of the letters looks like, how illegible is the writing, and this gives you an indication of whether that person needs to get some additional intervention and support. So when we're deciding on does this learner's writing warrant additional intervention? Should they be referred for handwriting therapy? We generally think about, is the handwriting legible to the reader? Can you read what they've written? And are they keeping up a reasonable pace with their thoughts, with their expression? If they had to say it out aloud, what the sentence they want to write down, is their handwriting keeping more or less up with them being able to say the sentence at a reasonable speed? And if that is very, if the writing is very illegible, so readers can't read it back to you, and this is a good exercise to ask a learner to read to you what they've written. Then, including the student also can't read it back to you. Then the handwriting, we can say that there's a problem with handwriting. And if they are writing very, very slowly, so we're looking at pace and we're looking at legibility of the writing. And if that is the case, then this learner would be referred for some kind of intervention. When we look at some of the characteristics of learning disabilities, SLD, we know that students with SLD score low. There are certain indices or diagnostic tests that a clinician will do, and these tests can look at a variety of different things. For instance, they can look at the generation of ideas when you want to write a paragraph, and we know that students with SLD score low on generating ideas, and they also score low on getting the grammar, the syntax, the punctuation, the word order correct. These students generally have more what we call word omissions, so they tend to leave out words in a sentence, either because it's too difficult for them to write it and it's laborious, and because they're writing so slowly, and they don't go back and recheck what they've written to see that it still makes sense. There is omissions, distorted word orders, and there might also be incorrect usage of verbs and pronouns. And often we will see that the endings of words will be incorrect. And we know that you start writing a word and you kind of run out of steam, they get tired, so they get fatigued, and brain just writes something very quickly to get the task done, or because they are tired. We also know that students with SLD have more difficulty with the structure of the text, the whole way that paragraphs or little stories are structured. And so this has got to do with difficulties with putting logical connections in place, and with having big ideas and small ideas inside them, the subordination of ideas. And this is often a key indicator that the learner has an SLD. So please remember that we all struggle with text and logical ideas and communication and all these difficulties, but we don't all have an SLD. So in order to do that diagnosis, these difficulties must be persistent, they must be seen in all school work and all school books, and they must be something that happens continually, and then we know that this learner has an SLD that is related to written, to writing. Generally, these learners will spend very little time in advance planning any work. If you ask them to write a little paragraph of what they did on the weekend, for instance, there'll be no planning or time or thinking about which aspect they'll write about. They just go get in and start writing. We know that they will produce less sentences and words generally than more proficient writers and learners of their own cohort age who do not have an SLD. They have difficulty generating appropriate content for whatever the topic is that they've been asked to write about. And so they're producing much shorter stories or shorter essays with limited information and limited background knowledge. So they're having difficulties, and we're looking at a variety of things. So we're looking at all aspects around creating your writing. We also know that these learners with SLD tend to have more difficulty with setting goals, deciding what they need to do, organizing their information, organizing the writing on the page, and we often see that with disorganized writing and paragraphs and ideas that don't make sense, and they will have difficulty going back, revising and evaluating and re-looking at the writing that they have already written and improving it. So as educators, we need to understand that writing, handwriting and generative writing, where we're writing, composing something, both of these aspects develop over time, and they need time for us to practice them. So if learners are practicing handwriting and generating stories on a regular basis, then the writing improves. And also within a subject area, there should be opportunities where learners are actually writing the subject area and not just blindly filling in worksheets that do not require them to think through the text and the content of that particular subject. So they should be given lots of assignments where they need to revise, to write things, and opportunities to revise. We tend to see that people do not spend enough time rereading what they've written and revising their texts so that they ensure that it makes sense, they've used the best words, the sentences are full sentences, and they've used the correct punctuation, and so on. And we should also ask students to reflect on their goals as a writer, their progress, how are they doing, and having clear rubrics to evaluate appropriate written tasks is also crucial for teachers to have in place to assist learners with writing. So we know that writing, now I'm talking about generative writing, creating something, an essay or an answer to a long question, generally comprises of several stages, and at each stage there are different skills that are involved. So our writing progresses develops as our oral and expressive language arts develop, and as we get better at understanding grammar, spelling, and punctuation, all those superficial aspects of the writing process, and the idea of conveying and communicating ideas is the key thing to the writing process. So it is a process whereby we want to put on paper the ideas that might be in our heads, or the ideas that we want a teacher to understand. And so I want to take you briefly through what the writing process looks like. Oh dear, hold on. Let's just go back. Okay. Submit. Right, the writing process. The writing process is a process, and I have put notes in Blackboard for you, which give very clear and detailed information about the writing process. So we generate ideas in some way. We put vocabulary together, which is going to be appropriate for that particular written passage. And then we need to structure the vocabulary in order to make sentences, get the grammar in the correct place, use the correct verbs and plurals and so on. And it is a complex process putting in place appropriate sentences and paragraphs. The underlying message is that we're looking for what is communicated. Are there ideas that are being written on the page that are appropriate for whatever the topic was, answering the question that the teacher put in place, and what is the quality of the work that the learner has done. And this is where we look at the appropriateness of the language, the ideas that are used, and how has it all been put together to make a logical, cohesive storyline or argument, depending on the kind of essay that the learner needs to write. And when we analyze spelling, then we're looking at some of the superficial ideas of handwriting and writing of the writing process, and we can analyze to see where the difficulties are that the learner is having. Are they having difficulties with vowels, confusion, or with blends, with digraphs, or with using the correct choices of when we've got two graphemes like a ch or a the, th. What are the difficulties that they're having when putting the when doing a written writing and sounds, oral words, and putting them onto paper. And then handwriting has got to do with the fine motor skills, the correct spacing of letters and words on the page, in straight lines, working from left to right, and how is the learner, are they fast with their writing? How are they actually making the formation of each of the letters? And is there enough speed and fluency that's happening with that handwriting? So you can see that handwriting and writing encompass a variety of different skills that need to come together in order for this to happen. And we also make a distinction between formal and informal writing. And formal writing is where you are producing a particular thing, like an essay, and that requires you to do a lot of different kinds of cognitive processes. So here, this is where you would go through the writing process stages, like brainstorming ideas, putting down a rough draft, going back and editing it, seeing if you've used the correct words, what better words could you use, how could the sentence be improved, and then eventually producing a final finished product that you're happy with giving to a teacher to mark, or sending out if you're writing essays for your blog or whatever you're producing things for. And then there's a whole variety of different things which we call informal writing, and this is where we are writing quick notes, writing down a message for yourself, doing shopping lists, writing yourself a reminder, putting something in your diary, using all the modern technology of WhatsApps and SMSs and email and so on. And for all of this writing, it's very quick. You want it to be written as fast as possible because most of it's a quick note to yourself or to someone else. And so you would not spend time doing the formal writing process of brainstorming and drafting and editing and revising. This is where that is really where it's for essays and important information that's going to be for public consumption. So informal writing is very quick, and this informal writing needs to be just legible for the person who has to be able to read it back. So you can see that writing and handwriting are very complex tasks. And here is a last slide which goes through the writing process in more detail. So this is a formal writing process where we brainstorm, develop a plan of what we're going to be writing. And this is a plan specifically for doing research, conducting research, making notes and so on, writing a draft, conferencing with other people in order to see what your writing looks like, and the idea of revising, getting your ideas in logical order, best vocabulary, using spelling, appropriate spelling, punctuation, grammar, and so on, and the final product. So writing and handwriting are very complex, and that is why I said right at the beginning to make a distinction between handwriting, which is the superficial, what you see on the page, formation of letters and the formation of words on the page, as opposed to this far more complex process of the writing process where you are generating some kind of written topic and written text. So I'm going to stop the recording.